Admit it, you thought we were gone, but we're back just in time for the weekend. ARN Podcast numero 7 coming your way now.
Por la historia. 3 puntos para Brasil.
Hello again, everyone. It's good to be back. We hadn't actually planned a 2-week break. We kind of ran into some, we'll call them production delays, but here we are. Fingers crossed we'll be back next week with another new episode. We've got 2 great guests this week, but full disclosure, both of those interviews were actually done just before the opening weekend of the America's Rugby Championship. So, I could have edited them so you wouldn't be able to tell, but we believe in transparency around here. So my apologies to both of them for the delay. Thankfully, all of the content of those discussions is still very relevant. Only 1 or 2 questions actually had anything to do with the events at the time. So don't worry, we won't be forecasting games that have already happened. It's all essentially new information. Of course, we are now through 2 rounds of the ARC. This past weekend's results in particular have thrown the competition for a bit of a loop, and we're going to talk about that in more detail a little later, but I did want to get this clip in, courtesy of Rugby Canada. This is Kingsley Jones talking about his team's performance in Brazil.
I was disappointed changing room, very disappointed for a number of reasons. The performance wasn't what we'd expect, but the biggest disappointment was the mental challenge. We expected a tough game. We know the environment's going to be hard. The officiating, there's young guys officiating, and I thought he did his job. The crowd, you've got to kill teams like Brazil off, and we failed to do that. A fantastic start, of course, and 10-0 up in a few minutes, and that possibly led to some complacency, I'm not sure. But the mental aspect is certainly an issue for us. Giving penalties away in our C-zone, basically kickable penalties. They got 2 things, a world-class kicker and a good scrum. And we're better every way, really, than Brazil, but we got to congratulate Brazil because mentally they did the job on us. We played 10-man rugby, and they got the outcome. They won the game, and there's a lot of work for us to do on the mental side of things. On the road, it's tough, but there's a lot of work gone on this week. A lot of positive training. We felt the prep was good. It showed down the first 10 minutes. But from then on in, we just panicked, forced things, tried to win the game from deep, and just went away from script. So when I talk about mental toughness, the biggest thing I mean is staying within the game plan, not getting involved in fights, not getting involved in argy-bargy, which is, fair play to Brazil. I'm not complaining about it because it's part of the game plan. We got drawn into all those things, exactly what we didn't want. And, look, we've got a hard lesson tonight. Found out a bit about a lot of guys as well. Congratulations to 3 new guys, young guys getting their caps this evening. Justin Blanchett, Will Priscillier and Will Kelly. So great achievement for them. And I hope that they learn from a hard lesson tonight, and they'll be part of our future plans. So the positive is we're getting players on the field and we're finding out about them all the time. But ultimately, it's not a good day. We'll break off now and we'll come back to face Chile at home, and we want to see a positive reaction, obviously.
Hard to argue with that. Really not a great game for Canada. I'm interested to see what kind of lineups there are for the remainder of the competition. Remember the 2 toughest games, the USA and the Argentina 15, are still ahead. A quick word for Luke Campbell, Canada's number 8. We don't yet have a report on the severity of his knee injury, but regardless, we certainly wish him all the best in recovery. Never nice to see players go down with what looks like a serious problem. I had the opportunity to speak to Eagles coach Gary Gold and captain Marcel Brachy just a few days ago on a conference call, and USA Rugby has graciously allowed me to include these next couple questions for you. Looking ahead at the World Cup from now, you've really only got the 3 North American leg matches of the ARC after this weekend, ahead of when you have the PNC and so on, the real build-up. Obviously injuries will play a part, but ideally, how many spots do you think in your squad of 31 at this point are still uncertain?
I'd say about 5 or 6. I'd say I'm pretty reasonably settled on, 23 to 25 positions in the squad. I mean, mostly all of those guys are here at the moment. So, with the exception of 1 or 2 guys, like potentially a Lamborn who's injured and Bowman who's still on the horizon, and a couple of other young guys who are putting their hand up at the moment at MLR, they could come into the equation as well. But I'd say about 5 or 6 guys. There's certainly still competition in key spots, and obviously Blaine's not here at the moment now. Samu's not here at the moment now, so we are missing quite a hand. We're missing a couple of guys who played regularly enough for us.
Kingsley Jones has made no secret that he's targeting a win over Italy to potentially earn automatic qualification for Canada at the World Cup. We're still a little ways out, but, you're in a difficult pool with 3 Tier 1 sides. France kind of self-combusted on the weekend. Is there one particular team looking at that you think you can overturn at the World Cup?
I think it's dangerous to go down that route, because I feel if you put all your eggs in one basket and say, for example, you do target an Argentina or a France, and it doesn't go well, then what's your next prize? I mean, the fact of the matter is, I think we're going to take a very similar approach to what Japan took in the last World Cup. We are in a very, very difficult pool. We appreciate that. Our position are quality. Every single one of them, including Tonga, are quality outfit. And, we want to make you guys and the supporters really proud of the efforts. And I think all we'll really do is, we're going to go there to try and win every game we can play. So I don't think we're going to target one team particularly above the other team. The draw is interesting as well because it obviously has us playing Tonga last, and that's with a 4-day turnaround. So again, that's maybe not necessarily a team you want to go public and say you're targeting there. So no, I think it's dangerous if you start, putting labels on targeting opposition. But I think the goal has got to be, because of the way the competition is set out and our lead into the competition is we really want to get off to a good start and be fiercely competitive in all the games. And then that's pretty much what our focus has been since we got here, and due to that we've been able to get a little bit lucky and get a couple of wins, and hopefully we can continue to improve as a group between now and then, and give ourselves a lot more confidence to be able to go in against teams like France, where hopefully we can go toe to toe with them for 80 minutes.
Thanks, Gary. And if I could just get one from Marcel. Marcel, you've been one of the leading professionals in the side since you started kind of at the end of 2016. At that time, about half the squad was still effectively amateur. Today, it's an almost entirely professional squad. How much of a difference has that made to standards in the day-to-day training from your perspective?
I think AJ made the point yesterday in the team meeting that we set off to win the game against Chile with the first practice that we had in Miami on Sunday, and that the standard which was set, that practice, set the time for the week. The standard was exceptional, skill levels were really high, and you put that really down to each player being involved in a professional rugby setup. And to see the difference between when I first joined the squad to now is amazing. But I think it's all credit down to the individuals that have put themselves in the place to actually be involved in these professional setups. And I was back at the end of 2016, guys were training as though they were professionals. So it's just all credit to the amount of perseverance and effort that the guys put in, that eventually the MLR and other gigs for some guys such as Joe and Cam, in some instance, these guys have got gigs and opportunities to play around the world, and now there's a professional rugby league in America, which is only going to increase the number of players that are coming through the system. So it's been awesome to see, and long may it continue.
The positive effects of Major League Rugby are really just starting to show. Canada won't really see the benefits until the next World Cup cycle. There was a great result this past weekend for Canadian rugby, however. The Toronto Arrows, they dug deep. They got the win in Austin, their first ever win. I thought Texas was supposed to be warm. The weather was terrible. Morgan Mitchell had a great game at prop, the New Zealander from Southland. I was impressed with Spencer Jones. He's Canadian-born, someone the Canadian selectors will be surely keeping a close eye on. I also thought Dan Moore did well at center. The Arrows will have Giuseppe Dutoit back from Canada this week, so it'll be interesting to see where everybody fits in. Certainly when they get a full-strength lineup, it'll be really interesting to see where all those pieces fit in the puzzle. Austin, on the other hand, really have to be concerned. That was the weakest Arrows lineup we'll see all season, and that's now 3 losses in a row at home for the Elite. They've got some players still tied up in the visa process, but they really need to get something out of the next 2 weeks. Glendale this weekend and then San Diego. So hopefully Peter Malcolm is back really soon from injury, and we'll see what happens there. The Legion pulled out the late win over Houston. Credit to the SaberCats for that defensive stand in the second half, but they never really looked like scoring. Osea Kalinasau is a big loss in the midfield. They miss his creativity. Not sure really when he'll be back. And along the same lines, San Diego are missing Ryan Matias. Of course, his ability to create line breaks. Joe Peterson is really saving their bacon right now. What a classy player he is. And what a great game in Louisiana. The Gold versus the Seawolves. NOLA really look awesome. And now they have Tony Lamborn as well. They're stacked. They have to be favorites for the title at the moment. And we'll see how the other teams adjust. New York is up this weekend. Nice to see them back. The schedule's a little weird in spots, and that 2-week break at the beginning of the season, not really ideal, but thankfully they're back now. We get to see these guys in action. Ben Foden again, going to play outside center. That's an interesting selection. So we'll see how that goes. One of the things I've noticed thus far in the season, and perhaps it's to be expected this early in professionalism, is a lack of conditioning with some of the players. I'm sure I've mentioned it before. Teams are just now really starting to catch up in the match fitness department. I wanted to get a little bit more insight into elite level strength and conditioning in general, and just happened to have the opportunity to chat with someone who knows a thing or two about that. Andy Evans was involved with Rugby Canada for about 5 years. He was the S&C coach with the Canada Sevens program when they were at their heights in the 2013-14 season. He was part of Kieran Crowley's staff that prepared for and traveled to the 2015 World Cup, and he's now restarting the rugby program at Trinity Western University in Langley, British Columbia, and I expect we'll be hearing more about that in the future. Andy, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. You've actually just returned from Gonzaga College in Washington, D.C., doing some coaching with the Stars Rugby Sevens under-19s. You're out in British Columbia. How did you get involved with them?
A couple years ago, the Stars were in town in Vancouver for the Vancouver Sevens Festival tournament. So I was able to help them out with some logistics and just connecting the United Rugby Club with them. So we hosted them and just helped them out in Vancouver. And then from then I've been in touch and I've provided them some strength and conditioning programming. And then they just asked if I'd be able to help coach their U19 squad. And I guess I worked a bit with their women and men a bit as well. Came in a day early to work with them. But yeah, so just helped Liz out with the Stars, and it was an awesome experience.
So is this gonna be something you're gonna be doing again in the future? Is this just kind of a one-off training camp?
Well, it was definitely an awesome experience. Just fly in to Washington D.C. and spend some time with some awesome athletes. I've really fallen in love with going to the United States over the last few years. When I was with Rugby Canada, we had some awesome tours, and just there's some awesome people down there. So I really like Canada working well with the United States. So I hope it's not the last time, and I'm sure it won't be. So there's a lot of encouraged U19 players with the Stars. They were called the Young Bloods, and now they're started calling themselves the Blood Clot. So I think they're developing their own identity within the Stars, which is pretty cool. But they played some good rugby, and we just trained over one day, and they played some good rugby against Gonzaga. So yeah, I'm sure we'll have more opportunity with the Stars to go coach these squads.
And you're heading off to San Diego tomorrow. So busy, living life out of a suitcase this week, kind of. Talking about the talent in the United States, of course, now they have something to really push towards with Major League Rugby. When the second season started this past weekend, of course, we saw the Toronto Arrows. Finally, we get a Canadian team to compete at the professional level. I noticed something watching the games. I wrote something a short time ago about the preseason I kind of felt was inadequate. Looking at some of the teams this weekend, you could really see a drop-off around, in the second half. But even earlier, some teams were really starting to fail really at the end of the first half and pretty early 55-minute mark in the second half. How important is getting that a strong preseason in before that comes, to avoid that meltdown?
It's definitely extremely important. Often it's easy to attribute, and I'm probably sensitive with a strength and conditioning background to being blamed for losses in the last 20 or 30 minutes of a match, but you have to be physically prepared for sure, but then also just the mental side of the game as well. But if you're not strong in your legs basically, and if you don't have a good aerobic base, you're bound to fall apart. So it takes a good training camp to make sure that you're physically prepared and your body's directly connected to your mind in rugby is definitely important.
Is there, like an ideal number of games you'd like to see play or minutes maybe? I guess minutes is the big thing nowadays. Is there an ideal number that you look at for a player to get in the preseason before that regular season starts?
In terms of like physical load, if we're looking at the physical body, it's important that you've trained for the worst case scenario. So you need to be able to handle the demands of the game. So you can either get that through structuring your training camp so that you're prepared for those demands, such as running. Like you need to be able to run over 5,000 meters to last 60 minutes typically, or you should train for that at least, that kind of goal for a back at least. And then forwards need to be able to keep on ticking for, similar running volumes as well. So if you haven't accumulated a proper running volume before your first match, you're going to fatigue pretty quickly. So rugby players are, at the professional level are typically running well over 20 kilometers a week. So the running volume and making sure you have high speed running in conjunction within training or preseason games, you need to have a good mix of that. So you just have to structure that properly. And the other thing, change of direction and all the contact and collision of rugby. You need to have a strong dose of that. There's ways to get it other than just in the weight room or doing tackle or contact or scrum sessions. But it's a stimulus the body needs to be prepared for. And if you don't, then you either slow down and play a pace of rugby that's not really fun to watch, or you end up getting injured, or both. So it's a tricky thing. There's a lot of details to it, but I think a lot of places will figure it out. I'm not sure where Major League Rugby's at. I'm pretty sure there's some good people involved, but I haven't really had too much contact with any of those franchises.
You got to travel around a fair bit, and you also got to work with guys, playing at clubs really all over the world. Did you ever get feedback from them? Like France kind of has this reputation that their S&C isn't really up to par compared to, say, North America. Did you ever get that impression from the players?
Well, there's so many different environments there. So I heard really good things from our players at Claremont, and then a lot of other players who weren't at the top flight of French rugby, who I communicated with. But it sounds like they had some really good personnel and facilities at Claremont. But yeah, definitely some stories from some of the other players in France, like they were not allowed to squat or things like that. So you hear some odd things, and players often would sneak off. A lot of our Canadian players are really hardworking boys, and they'd sneak off and do their weights on their own or whatever if they weren't allowed at their clubs. So you get that perspective. And then when there was the pro rugby, a couple of our players at San Diego had a really good experience, had a lot of good things to say with the training they had down in California. So definitely there's, and I think it was probably a breath of fresh air, probably getting something a little bit different, learning from other sports. So rugby doesn't have it all figured out. There's a lot of really good things in rugby, but I think there's still a lot rugby can learn from other sports. I think the football background and a lot of things was probably one of the things that those players in San Diego liked.
I mean, you worked across a lot of different sports and, a wide range of requirements and really interests. Some of them probably be a lot more heavy in the gym. Others more conditioning, motion based. But having done all that and working with rugby, where does rugby stack up for those sports for you? I mean, obviously you're very passionate about the sport. Is that what you really enjoy working with, is rugby players?
I really do love working with rugby players. Overall, between the front row to the back three, you've got to be good at everything and prepared for a lot. So as a strength and conditioning coach or a sports scientist or a coach, you have to be really integrated with your team and making sure all your players are covered from 1 to 15, and then developing players from a young age to be able to play at a international or professional level is a really fun challenge, and it's really awesome to see the growth of players. So to have the opportunity to see some of the players like U20s in 2011 to their professional careers now, it's really, really cool to see the work that they've put in and how they've kind of maximized their genetic potential. And often it takes quite a while, especially for like type 5 type players or forwards, to develop that. Rugby is really fun to work in strength and conditioning, and there's a lot of scientific research done in it, and that's a tribute to a lot of the Southern Hemisphere franchises that really work well with universities. It's same within the UK, so there's a lot of good things in rugby. But there's like sports like volleyball at the university I'm working at now. Like, those athletes are phenomenal, and if we could convert some of those to be locks, lineouts could go to a whole new level.
So you're now going to be taking over the Trinity Western program, a director of rugby for women's sevens and the men's 15s. You know, it's just getting started, so you really get to build the whole program from scratch. Coming from an S&C background, that must be very exciting for you. Yeah,
it's been fantastic. So I've been at it working towards rugby for the past year and a half at the school, and I've been completing a master's degree in high performance sport and technical leadership at UBC, and is put together by a group of sport bodies in Canada, so On the Podium and Canadian Sports Institute and UBC and Coaches Association of Canada. So through that, there's a bit of a plug for them, but it's been phenomenal. So it's been giving me the background on the administrative side of things. So getting all our financials in place that we're able to put together a pretty phenomenal rugby program that's supported by the university. And then also just digging into the coaching side of things and making sure that we're getting the best personnel to ensure rugby players at Trinity Western are supported in a way that they can get to the professional or international level while getting an awesome education. So yeah, to be a director of rugby, to really make an impact in many people's young lives, it's a big responsibility and a really fun challenge.
You know, a little small part of your trip to San Diego will be some recruiting. Obviously, you're going to be looking far and wide. You've got some scholarships, I hear, on offer there. When you're recruiting an athlete, are you looking for for rugby specifically? Are you looking for a raw athletic potential? Someone you can maybe mold along the way. Are you looking for looking at the rugby skills? It's just a mishmash. Do you have kind of one thing that pushes above something else?
In Canadian sport, like On the Podium, they've got a model that they're looking for to produce results that's evidence-based. So with a team sport such as rugby, you want to have a winning style of play. This is what the women's sevens program in Canada has to provide evidence to On the Podium to get their funding and make sure that they're on the right track. So winning style of play is just providing evidence of a way that you aim to tactically and technically play the game to win a podium result. So within rugby, there's a style of rugby we'd like to play at Trinity Western that's pretty expansive and fun and explosive and dynamic. So those are the type of athletes that we need to find in a gold medal profile is the language that they call it in Canada. So for each position, 1 to 15, you've got a physical profile that we'll be looking for. And for me, I'm really interested in finding those types of athletes that have that kind of potential to develop that skill set. A lot of it's based off of the Southern Hemisphere teams and the style of rugby that we'd like to play, and those are the types of players that I'd be looking for. And in North America, I'm not expected polished athletes with the best decision-making or the best skills, and we hope to coach them up at Trinity Western. But there are definitely some physical qualities we'd be looking for specific positions. But rugby is an awesome game where, there's flexibility in positions where you can excel kind of despite not fitting the mold. So in an answer, we're looking for specific things, but if an athlete shows us they're capable of fulfilling a role, we want to take a serious look at them. And then along with those, there's really big character and personal piece to that and the values that these individuals have. So we want a program to develop fine individuals, and the mission of our university is to develop leaders for the global marketplace, to serve others. And that's what we hope our rugby program does, not just about the rugby.
Kind of like everyone talks about the New Zealand ethos where, better people will make better rugby players, that kind of idea. We've had like Curry Hitchborn on talking extensively about the value of collegiate rugby and university rugby as a development program. Also, Pete Steinberg talking about that from specifically an S&C perspective, because you're obviously an expert in that area. How critical is that kind of that point in time from they're coming in probably around 18, 19 until 22, 23, probably something like that. Is how critical is that for developing your body and your strength from then to becoming potentially a professional athlete?
It's extremely important, and it's really the key window that in North America we need to make sure that we're responsible with in developing. Often when we're at Rugby Canada, you get the U20s coming in, and I think it's definitely gotten better with better university programs and training environments across the country. But when we were doing U20s, you get some genetic freaks who come in who could challenge a senior man for their place on the team. But the majority weren't physically prepared enough. And if you look at the karting athletes for sevens, typically it would take 2 years of training in the centralized environment before they were ready for the circuit. So if we're able at age 18, or even if we're able to provide some support across the country, and I think there's some really good work being done with Rugby Canada, and I think Gethin Watts has been doing some awesome encouragement and working with people across the country to ensure that these athletes are getting in environments where they can start a bit younger and start getting that cumulative training dose that's necessary to prepare the body for international rugby. And there's some key adaptations that happen. If you look at rugby players or wrestlers, they look like rugby players or wrestlers, and even just playing rugby a lot will give a good dose on the body that'll make adaptations that's suitable for playing rugby. So you look at any front row who's been doing that for 15 years, they look like a prop and might have a rugby hump, but that's a adaptation to playing rugby. So there needs to be a balance between playing rugby and training for rugby, and then also being in the weight room. So there's a lot of key adaptations that happen between the age of 18 to, if you're a front rower, to 30, or for a back between, you could even go younger, but 18 to 23 is a really key age that if we can do that well, it'll make massive difference to the level of rugby in North America.
Now, you were, training with the sevens. You did the 2013 Rugby World Cup sevens, and you were with the team, the men's team, 2013-14 season when they finished 6th overall on the 7 series. Looking at the teams ahead, New Zealand, South Africa, Fiji, England, Australia. Obviously in sevens, fitness conditioning is a massive component of success. So looking at that now, do you think that there was any higher they could have gone with any changes in conditioning, or at that point, is it more pure athleticism and rugby ability to get higher up the ladder?
That was a special group of athletes who really bonded in that year to come into 6th in the world. And the physical side of things, those men trained extremely hard and pushed one another, and they're extremely physical. I think we did a lot of things right that year. I think the players were really well supported, and they were playing 15s as well, and they had a huge rugby load, and then still had some really good performances. And we qualified for the World Cup that year. They played pretty good rugby to do so as well. So I just credit those guys for playing some really good rugby 15s and 7s. Phil Mack was a key leader, and John Moonlight, Nate Hirayama. Those guys are pretty phenomenal, and they all stand out today. So in terms of fitness, those guys were pretty fit. I looking back, I always feel I could have done things better myself, but despite me, they still got pretty good results.
It's interesting you talk about those guys playing both 7s and 15s at that time. There wasn't really as clear a separation. We kind of got into something where it was very separated. Now, recently, we've kind of had a strategic change where they've a little bit shifted back to where it's more interchangeable. Although, as I understand it, they are now mostly training separately now, as opposed to being all mishmashed into one centralized group. But how different is it really, the physical preparation between the 7 series and the 15s? Like, how different are the physical requirements between the two?
Yeah, the way I always looked at it is that was a challenge that we were faced with, and I wanted to look at it as an opportunity. So if we could have the speed and dynamic athleticism of 7s, an X factor from 7s combined with the physicality and robustness of 15s, we could make some special rugby players. So that's the philosophy I took into preparing the men. We lifted a lot of weight. Like those 7s guys, we threw a lot of volume at them, and they handled it really well. And then the running volumes were pretty tremendous. So 7s players will run over 30 kilometers a week, and much of that high-speed volume. So the games are quite different. I think there were times when we were able to give them more transition time to go from 7s to 15s. And if they were centralized for a longer period in the 15s environment and getting used to that type of training and longer training sessions and then playing a few games over 80 minutes, then their bodies can adapt to a bit more of the aerobic side of 15s and different pace. And then switching back to 7s is probably a little bit trickier. I didn't have to put my own body through it, so it'd be a good question to ask those guys a bit more. But they were up for the challenge and they did it really well. So they're different games for sure. But I think if you can look at it as an opportunity to try to be a special breed of rugby player, then I think that's what they did that year, and they had some pretty phenomenal results. So John Moonlight and Phil Mack were on the dream team that year, I think, for 7s. They're just unreal people. So I think they're up for a challenge, whatever. So I think often, just lately, I think it's more the interpersonal conflicts that have kind of been at Rugby Canada. But I think looking at it now, like they're really well sorted and on a path towards success with some really good individuals at Rugby Canada. So I'm really excited for the future there.
Well, it sounds like you're pretty positive for the future of Rugby Canada these days, which is good to hear. You know, it's kind of been a struggle for a while now. We've had some rough days. You know, part of what I'm hearing that's coming in the works is kind of a revamp or a reboot of the old Pacific Pride program. Maybe not exactly the same, but where they have a development program. They'll use the centralized guys who aren't in collegiate university teams to play in that side. Do you think that's a good thing to bring back to Canada?
I think it's awesome. Rugby Canada has been really collaborative lately, and I've had some really good discussions with good people over there, and I really think there are well thought out plans, especially for 15s, to ensure players are supported and getting the support that they need to be able to perform on the world stage. And I think it's not about any egos or anything. They just genuinely want what's best for these players. So also I've had discussions about them encouraging the university program. So I've been reaching out to make sure that our program at Trinity Western University is aligned with Rugby Canada and supportive of what they're trying to accomplish. And it sounds like with the revamped Pride or Rugby Canada Academy for these young guys, I think we're going to have some really good competitions between these universities and the academy. And also that academy gives players who may not be academics an opportunity to, pursue a trade or something else and play rugby and train in an environment that'll help them get to that next level. And if you have 4 or 5 really good training environments for young men, with good competition where they're going to be, lifting weights and having skill sessions and units and team sessions all throughout the week. It's not just club rugby where you're training twice a week. If you're doing that with over, if you have four teams with 30 players of interest, that's 120 athletes, that's of young men, that's pretty phenomenal. So if you're pulling out of that pool of cumulative training, you're going to probably have some good results. So I think that's a bit of the wave that of thinking that's happening at Rugby Canada, and I'm really encouraged by the conversations we've had over there.
So if players are interested, young players out there are interested in looking at one of these scholarships at Trinity Western, how do they get in touch with you? How do they kind of apply for this?
Yeah, they just get in touch with me Andrew Evans at twu.ca is my email address. So give me a shout, and or you can look up, we've got a webpage, twu.ca/rugby. So if they go on there, there's a form they can fill out, and we'll be in touch. You don't have to be the best polished rugby player. We've got some big scholarships, but then we've got rugby is a sport for all. So if they want to get an education and play rugby, we'll have a development program as well to help them get to that level where they can reach a bigger scholarship. And if they're a stud already and the right fit character-wise, then they could get a pretty attractive scholarship to make education extremely cheap for themselves. So I'm really excited I've already been in touch with a lot of really awesome young people for this program, but we want to make sure that we're working with the other universities locally. And the other coaches have been awesome in supporting. So there's so much to be positive about in collegiate rugby in Canada right now. So, and credit to Rugby Canada for supporting that.
For any young rugby players in the country to get to work with someone with your experience, that would definitely be a positive, I dare say. So before I let you go, I got to get some kind of story out of here. Looking back at all the incredible athletes you've worked with, do any stand out in the training environment as being particularly impressive? Like maybe someone's really, really strong in the weight room or something, or someone is just a complete freak doing the yo-yo or beep test or anything like that. Is there anybody really stands out? Is there any one story that sticks out?
I don't have any like highly entertaining stories or anything. I think the one guy who's just overall outstanding, I'll give you 7s player and then 15th player, but so Nate Hirayama, like you watch him play on the field, like you try to do an agility session with Nate Hirayama, you can't teach that guy anything because he was just blessed from God to be able to move the way he is. But then in the weight room, like he's one of the most powerful on the yo-yo test or on the Bronco or whatever. He'll just smash it. Acceleration, he's awesome. So Nate's unreal, and you can watch it on the field, and he puts it up all the time. So for years, like a decade. So he's pretty phenomenal. And then in terms of like wrestling or combat and collision, we mentioned, and so Adam Kleberger was one of those guys who just had the intensity. And I think he's probably one of Canada's greatest leaders that we've had, and he's a pretty quiet kind of guy, but led by example. So on the wrestling mat, he's a freak. Guys wouldn't want to go against him doing combat sessions just the intensity Klebs brings to all that he does. So he's I'm so happy that he's been leading a key role in Canada's development. He's the type of guy you want to follow. So, and I think he saw that at the 2011 World Cup. And then he was there during that successful year with the 7s as well. So you point back to strong leaders like Klebs. He's a freak. He can lift a ton of weight, extremely powerful, but he'll put his body on the line, and we've seen that. So he's seen it in slow motion against Tony Woodcock. So yeah, those are two guys who stand out to me, and awesome characters and great men.
Yes, certainly two of the most memorable players in Canadian rugby in recent years, and we still get to watch Nate Hirayama in action. Well, Andy, enjoy the trip to San Diego, and we look forward to watching you build what sounds like a great new program at Trinity Western, and thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, Brian, and appreciate it to all that you do to make sure these stories are told and highlight all the athletes around in North America. So my full support. Thank you.
That was Andy Evans, formerly head of strength and conditioning at Rugby Canada, now director of rugby at Trinity Western University. And I should add that Trinity have now picked up Adam Roberts to help run that program. Adam is a very promising coach from BC who was a good player back in the day and now involved with Canada's age grade program. So Trinity Western really putting themselves on the map. They'll be a good spot for young players looking to put themselves in contention for international rugby in the future. You can find Andy on Twitter at AndyEvans_SS. Maybe SS stands for superstar or something. You'd have to ask him. He's quite active there, so check him out on there. My next guest is also pretty unique. It's hard to find interviews and insight into South American rugby written in the English language. Of course, that was part of the idea behind ARN in the first place, but It's even more challenging to find audio interviews. Part of that difficulty, of course, is the language. I don't speak Spanish or Portuguese, and while Paul Tait does, it wouldn't really fit into a podcast geared to an English audience. By the way, shout outs to the En La Mêlée podcast started by Victor Perez. If you're interested in a Spanish language MLR show, check that one out. So I wanted to get some genuine insight into Uruguayan rugby in particular, and finding a player as experienced as my next guest, who also happened to speak pretty good English, was really exciting for me. Carlos Arboleya played for Los Teros for more than a decade. He won more than 60 caps. He captained the side. He was the starting hooker at the 2015 World Cup. He was with the team as recently as last year, and he occasionally makes appearances as a commentator on Uruguayan television. This is my conversation with Carlos just ahead of the opening round of the ARC. Carlos, thank you so much for your time. I want to start by offering you an apology for calling you old when I saw you playing at the Punta del Este. I suppose 33 isn't actually that old.
Thank you very much, Brian, for reaching out. It's a pleasure for me. I do believe I'm not old, but just circumstances are telling me otherwise. But I'm still having fun, and I think that's the best part.
I read an article in El Observador by Ignacio Chanz about you and Martin Espiga, where you call yourselves former Teros. Are you now retired from international rugby?
I would say so, because I don't have the time to train as much as I would like. And the actual need for Teros right now is to have almost a professional circumstances around them, so they should be training a lot as they are. I think I could still help in some way, and it's hard to say that I'm retired, but I think that circumstances have retired me, I guess. I think that I could play a little more always, but I'm gonna enjoy what I can get.
So I guess what you're saying is that they're looking at more of a commitment from the other guys at the central training group, but you would answer the call if Esteban called you tomorrow and said, "We need you," you would still play.
I mean, what I say is last year I made a decision because I was working and I had a lot of commitment to that work in terms of schedule, and that maybe close a couple of doors for me. But I'm always open to rethink the situation, as I've done it several times in the past. It's hard for me to say no. The Teros gave me a lot of what I am, so it's really hard to say no to a call. That's what I meant.
When you see someone like Rodrigo Capo Ortega still playing professionally for Castra and still playing for Los Teros, I mean, can you believe that he's still going, knowing that he started even before you did with the team?
Yeah, I mean, Rodrigo is one of a kind. He's the best Uruguayan rugby player in the history. The thing that he has done, no one else has done it. 2 championships with Castres, being a captain, 20 years in professional rugby. I mean, I think he has a lot of hard work behind it, and he has a lot of work ethic. So he can maintain himself in that top league. And that's his work. His life goes around rugby, and 100% that, and his family obviously. But it's hard to believe that he has gone that far. But he keeps playing and playing every weekend better. So who could question him?
I read something in that article where you were saying that if you were 23, now you might consider a professional rugby career, but you're a bit older than that now. Was there ever an opportunity for you to go professional, maybe in France or anything?
I would have considered it, but I never searched for it. So, and nobody ever asked me, to be true. So I would have done it probably after the World Cup, like maybe like a year or something like that. But I also graduated, so trying to put all those hours of studying and working hard for it, trying to get a job around that area, I would have liked that. That's what I think. And rugby will give me maybe 2 more, 3 years. Steady job will probably give me quite more than that.
Now, you kind of come from the amateur era. A lot of these guys, Martin Espiga is a doctor, Joaquin Pradal also studying medicine. You went to actually Duke University to study an MBA. How important do you think is it to have that career, to have an education behind you, apart from rugby?
I mean, I think that's definitely a must. You shouldn't get a contract if you haven't finished high school, and you shouldn't get a contract if you haven't studied something else. Because rugby, it could be your life, but if you get injured and you don't have a backup plan, that's not good for anyone. And most of the guys are around my age. We love rugby and we have it like a second thing after study, but we know that study was the first thing, and that will take us the long way. And we will give rugby all the other time that we didn't end up studying, but we know that the important thing was studying. I mean, because after that, if rugby takes you 38, after that, what you can do? You won't live up with the money you've saved. That's what I mean.
You played for Los Terros I'm trying to think, your debut 2004 against Georgia. Is that right?
Yeah, here in Uruguay.
Yeah, so more than 10 years you played for Los Terros. Looking back, is the highlight for you, as it stands, Rugby World Cup 2015?
Yeah, definitely. I debuted after the 03 World Cup. And so there was a rough years for Los Terros, and there are changing of presidencies, people not wanting to be in the team, changing coaches. There were a lot of things that would work against the best performance of the team. And there were a couple of years that I didn't actually play because I was injured. And then when all things came together around 2013 with Pablo Lemoine, it changed the aspect of how people would look at the team and how we will work for the team. And me getting into that squad, and after getting into the squad, being lucky enough to play all the games, I think that was the highest point in my career, definitely. And one of the things I will remember for a long, long time, definitely.
How did it feel to score against Fiji at Milton Keynes, the first World Cup try for Uruguay in 12 years?
Well, there was a big joy in me, a lot of relief, because we were working, all the team was working trying to score, because we have some really rough games against Wales and Australia. And I think in that game, we were playing much more than the other games. We were having the ball, we're passing the ball, we're running. And just I was there in the right place. It could have been just another one, but it was an immense joy. It was just like big amount of relief that went all through my body. I still get goosebumps every time I watch a video.
You were part of the squad when you beat Russia to qualify for the World Cup the year before.
Yeah.
Are there any other games, throughout those 10 years that kind of stand out looking back at them?
On the upside, there are a couple of games against Chile in Chile that were very good, because when I was captain, I remember one that was really, really tough, 2010. Then in 2014, we play against Russia in the Nations Cup, and as we beat them in a very, very contested match, I think it was like 11-8, something like that, we changed the world ranking, and we got to decide on Montevideo, the qualifications. That was a really tough game. And it also meant a lot for us to have the decider on Montevideo. Obviously, the game was against Russia, anyone from the World Cup. Maybe they debuted because I was very young, and I debuted in a position that I had played in a couple of years. They put me up as a loose head, and I was training as a hooker. That was fun.
Now, you played across the front row, really, during your international career, but I guess largely at hooker. Is hooker your preferred position? Yeah,
definitely, because I don't get tired as much playing hooker, and I can run a little bit more, and I like being in the open side. I played as props, mostly tight head, and then some years as a loose head. But I get really tired playing like that. I'm a man in the scrum, and then I don't play a lot.
The scrum is obviously it's very strong in South America. Traditionally, it's a point of strength. Certainly in Argentina, also in Uruguay. How much difference is there really between hooker and tight head prop? There seems like there's a lot of players who can play both from down there. Is this just something that you get from growing up, asking to play other positions in your club? Why is it we see that? Like right now, I could see, well, there was yourself, obviously, but a guy like Guillermo Pujadas coming up now is playing across the front row, the same thing.
Juan Echeverria could play either position in the front row too. He has done that. I think is one of the things that they teach us here is like whenever they doom you to be a front rower, you need to play in every position. It's just like that. Unless you're a really big guy that you won't play in a hooker. Otherwise, you need to play number 1, number 2, number 3, and you can just get used to it. You're probably gonna lose some of like very specific skills, knowing how to play the 3 positions. But in my case, for example, it gave me an edge against another players in the squad for the World Cup because I could be the replacement of anyone. That's really good. It's just you need to get used to it.
Something now the trend is for, to move a back rower to the front row. I know many years ago they were looking at possibly Alejandro Nieto moving there, but he ended up staying at number 8. But now Manuel Ardao is getting a good look at hooker right now. What do you think of a move like that?
I mean, it's nothing new. You have Agustin Krevi. He played for us flankers number 8, and he's one of the best hookers in the world right now. It will take a lot of effort. It would take a lot of a change in the physique. Manuel will have to gain out definitely a couple of pounds because nowadays front rowers and forwards in general are getting bigger and bigger and heavier. So once you are good at some maybe running and passing and you have a good technique in the scrum, but if you don't have enough weight, at some point they will just outweight you, and then you're gonna have a really bad afternoon. But I mean, they could work because people were used to have props that wouldn't pass or wouldn't dribble, and nowadays you can see a lot of props on front rowers that can do that. So just trying to learn them from being when they are kids, or just trying to change that afterwards.
Have you seen a big change in the standard of rugby in Uruguay since in these past 10, 12 years?
Yeah, because I think from some time onwards, the focus has been on skills and how you make decisions, the time in which you make a good or bad decision. That's what changed the game. So, okay, you need to run, you need to be strong, you need to know how to pass it, but now you need to know how to pass it really good to both sides and know how to make a good decision, to find the spaces. All that wasn't really a focus. There were some people that would basically naturally know it, and then the other guy would just be in support. Now everybody has to know how to do those things.
This weekend, obviously, Canada plays Uruguay in Montevideo, the first weekend of the America's Rugby Championship. You were the captain at the Churchill Cup back in 2010 when Los Teros lost to Canada by 48-6. Going into this weekend's game, Uruguay has won 3 games in a row against Canada. I guess, first of all, looking back at 2010, did you think that the tide would turn, that you would get back to be able to compete against Canada? And what do you think was the turning point? What really helped Uruguay rugby to get to where it is now?
At that point, I wouldn't think that we'd have won 3 games in a row. Probably if you got a better team, we might have won some games. Uruguay had beaten Canada before. But I guess just the way it changed, how professionally is now addressed all what is around rugby in terms of strength and condition, in terms of tactics, in terms of overall training, getting ready, the way people eat, the way people rest, the way people travel. Unions are making an effort so to everybody can travel safely and have a good time to recover whenever they get to somewhere. So that change and probably a little bit of declining in terms of the Canadian Union. This is a really personal opinion. All those elements led Uruguay won 3 times in a row. It's just like a conjunction of all those things.
You've experienced lots of coaches. You said obviously when Pablo Lemoyne came in, your old teammate, you played with him. Obviously he had a long professional career from Uruguay to come back and support the team through 2015, and then you got Esteban Meneses from Argentina came over. What was the change like there with the two of them? Like, what's the difference between their approaches?
One thing that I want to say is that also behind Pablo Lemoyne, there was a lot of, I think the change back in those days, it was the way all the clubs aligned behind the union, just try to go in the same direction, which it was something that it didn't happen before. And that would harness any intention of good rugby in terms of Los Teros or whatever project somebody would present. And so that putting behind the coach or the union just helped a lot. Pablo would have a very, very tight grasp on all the aspects. He would like to know everything about everyone and every part of the game. And Esteban, he's more like a tactical guy. He's more from behind. He knows everybody, and he's aware of all the status. But he just delegates more in all the other coaches that he has, and so maybe the situation's a little less tight, something like that. He just came with a lot of more years of coaching and another a different approach in terms of he would like to be more analytical and not try to be in every little detail. If somebody wasn't passing it right, there was this guy who would tell him how to pass. No, he would not come Esteban to tell you need to do it like this now. So, and Paulo would be all over the guys. I mean, just different approach on how to manage teams, I guess.
The other change that seems like a big change is the Charrua has now developed, and there's the full-time training environment there. How much of a help is that to have that center of excellence where everybody can go and train together and prepare physically at the same time?
That's cornerstone of whatever growth Uruguayan rugby has had, because there was always somebody training there. You could have balls. You go to kick if you're a kicker. You want to throw if you're a hooker. There was a gym. There was a doctor up sometimes. There's physiotherapy every morning and in the afternoon. You can have one of the coach probably working there, and you can ask him whatever you want to know. The nutritionist, they go, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 times a week. It's just a place where you can go, and if you're part of the team, you have something to do. You can rest. You can have a good shower. There's a lot of things. Also, when you have under 20, under 18 teams, they would go to the same place and see the other guys who are bigger than them, that they may have seen them in the World Cup, and just train and dream to be like them. And they have already gone through those processes, and some of them are actually trying to get into this World Cup.
We've seen these huge changes on the field. Uruguay has had tremendous success since Rugby World Cup 2015, and probably the biggest, obviously, beating Canada to qualify for Rugby World Cup 2019 this year. How's the popularity of the sport in Uruguay itself? How do the people think of the game now? Has it increased its popularity because of the success?
Yeah, definitely. It has. I was hearing one of the sports commentator a couple of months ago. They were arguing that rugby was now the second sport in Uruguay. I think that's a stretch, because obviously you have football as number one, or soccer if you want it. But then also there's always basketball, which is a really good one. But it hasn't had the best of times in terms of sports success. And now rugby is getting bigger and bigger, and we got to qualify for this year's World Cup, and beating Canada was a huge boost. And so people are going to Charrua trying to watch the games. There were around 8,000 to 10,000 people watching the Los Teros Jaguares game a couple of weeks ago, or last week, I guess. And I think there's going to be a lot of people watching Uruguay against Canada. So it's just slowly getting really known, the sport. And people are just throwing away the idea that it's a violent sport, that just people would just beat each other out in the field, and that it's a very snob sport. I think it's working steadily and progressively towards being a more popular sport.
10 of Los Teros have gone to the United States to play for in Major League Rugby. Are people aware of this? Are people following that at all?
Yeah, I guess people who know rugby, they all know about this. It's starting to show in the media here. Just last week was the first game. It's getting a lot of attention, but I think it's a short season, so we will have to see how much people could really get a hold of the championship.
The next step, from what we're hearing anyways, is that the Liga Americana or Sudamericana or whatever it's going to be called, the LAR, is going to be starting soon. Hopefully next year is the plan, I guess. And they're talking about 2 teams in Uruguay, possibly linked to Nacional and Peñarol, the huge soccer teams.
Yeah.
Do you think this is, first of all, I mean, do you think this is going to happen? And do you think Uruguay can support these 2 teams?
I really don't know if we can support those teams. I really hope we can. I'm having a lot of issues about actually seeing those teams playing next year, as people told. But the ARC was like a dream when the first came to told us that we were going to play 5 games again with Canada, the States, Chile, Argentina, and Brazil. It's like this won't last. It has a lot of a lot of traveling, and it's in the middle of February. We are like in pre-season, and we are entering the 4th tournament this year. So we need to take our hopes up and hope for the best. I mean, maybe the first year it won't be a very competitive tournament, and there will be a lot of things that won't go out really well. But if you can put Nacional and Peñarol behind the teams, they could have a really good boost, and it's also would work as a way of changing the way people see rugby, and also trying to change the way people see that the adversity between Nacional and Peñarol, which is always in terms of soccer, like it has a lot of violence and all that. Then we can show them the other way with rugby.
Do you think this is the next step really for Uruguayan rugby? I mean, you can send players to Europe. Felipe Berchesi's been over in France, obviously. Capo Ortega has been there for years. But is it really necessary? Is it almost a priority to get some kind of professional rugby in South America to give those players options closer to home?
I haven't really made up my mind of what this league meant professionally for the rugby clubs here, because they're going to be 40, 45 guys training, not much more than that, and maybe in a couple of years another team. How would it affect clubs? That would be the most difficult question to ask. And if they do get affected, that will harness badly on our rugby, because clubs are the main thing that just keep feeding Los Teros and all those professional teams. I'm just trying to mirror Argentina and see how they did it, and they haven't gone professionally. So it's difficult for me to think that we, as a very small country with much less players, will be able to hold 2 teams or maybe more teams. I hope we can. I mean, I think it will be great, and we will increase our level. But it's hard to think that we can just strip the best players from clubs and not lower the level of the Uruguayan Championship.
How popular is that? The Campeonato, the Uruguayan Championship, is it? I mean, I saw the video of the final. I'll ask you about that in a moment. But it seemed like there were lots of people there watching the game. Is this really popular?
In the final stages, people go to the games. During the pool stages, there's not much people going. They could go to really good games. Maybe Old Boys, Old Christian. There you can have a good amount of people. Some Old Christians, Carrasco Polo. There's a lot of people going. Otherwise, not a lot of people. When semifinals or finals are played, there you can have more people, but a couple of thousands, not much more than that.
So really, we'll be just kind of put it out there and see what happens with this whole professional thing, I guess, is what's going to happen. So Trebol won the championship in November for the first time ever. Congratulations. That's your team. It tied. The game was tied after 100 minutes in the final.
Yeah.
And your team actually won on a penalty shootout against Old Christians, I believe.
Yes.
And Andres de Leon, the Teros fly half, missed a kick, and then you guys made it. How amazing was that moment for you and your club?
For the club, it's amazing. We've been working for several years. I would say 10 or 12 for me, and obviously 30 or more for some of the old folks. We've been trying to improve as a club, playing and institutionally, and so there was a big effort that we did, and it was a great award to have won last year. I think we don't still believe it, because it's really odd. In the last 30 years, only Carrasco Polo, Old Christians, and Old Boys have won, and then we just squeezed it in with that kick. And the game itself, the final, was crazy, 100 minutes, and we were tied 22-22 in the 65th minute, so there were like a whole 40 minutes without anybody scoring, so it was crazy. But I think that treble won. It will also help the England to develop a little bit more of rugby, where there's half of the population of Uruguay and there's a lot of potential. So hopefully it will do good for Uruguayan rugby.
Like you just said, only the 3 big clubs have won for the last forever, really. Is this also a good thing for other smaller clubs, Los Cuervos and cricket club. Does this give them a little bit of hope that they can actually achieve that level?
I think, yeah, definitely. Both cricket and Los Cuervos, they have had really good championships. They were like inches away of reaching the final. Personally, we had with Treble, we played like 7 or 8 semifinals. We had never reached a final before. We just got really lucky when we reached the final last year because all Christians have a really good team, and we won like with sheer luck, I guess.
So, how long do you see yourself playing club rugby now?
I would say 2 more years, maybe. I just started pre-season, so I'm just taking day by day, I guess. Last year was a really long one. I ended up really tired. I got to play afterwards with 7, but we will see if I can find a good tight head, and I don't have to play tight head. That will be fun, and probably will play another couple of years.
Looking at where Uruguay is right now, how are they feeling heading into this ARC competition? Do you think that they're going to have a good championship?
I think so. Yeah, I think they're going to have a good championship. USA game, which is going to be in US soil, so that will probably be the toughest one. And obviously Argentina 15, which they always have a good team. I'm just guessing this year the best players are going to be saved for Los Pumas squad. So it's just a little guess that they will have maybe a team with a lower level. Now that I've said this, they will going to probably beat everybody by 50 points. But I guess I'm sure they're going to have a really good championship. They're training a lot. I really know that. And I hope the best for them, definitely.
Is there any young players or players that we may not know so much about that you think are particularly in a good spot or ready to break through?
I think one of Agustín de la Corte, which is outside center, inside center. I think he's from my club. He has played not that much, but if they give him the opportunity, he could really get himself in the squad. And then I think you named it. I think Pujadas also has a really good technique, and he could play everywhere. Just he needs to get a little better physically, and he's a good player.
So looking at now to the World Cup, they qualified this time pretty easily.
You don't want to talk about that games, right?
I really don't. I remember watching that actually very late at night, and I wasn't massively surprised. They were very good going into that game. I mean, they played really well. It made a lot of progress. As you say, Canada's was not at a good level. They had a really bad year, so no momentum. I'm just excited to see the development in Uruguayan rugby, to have that competition. Like you say, I think the Americas Rugby Championship has really improved the quality of the Americas as a whole. So it's been a great competition. There's also this thing where they're talking about this World League. What do you think of that with regards to the Tier 2 levels? Is this a good thing for the Tier 2 countries? It seems almost like the Tier 1 teams are blocking everybody off if they do this.
I really haven't read a lot about it, but there's 2 ways to see it. One is that Tier 2 nations need a lot of competition. That's the only way to help them improve. And they need to compete against the best ones. Just like Georgia says that they want to enter 6 nations because they know they can beat 1 or 2 of the other teams. So maybe they could make a really hard game for them. But there's gonna have to be some kind of relegation for teams to be like motivated to play and try to go into that level. Otherwise, it's gonna be a super elite team of nations that are gonna be, the growth rate is gonna be every year higher, bigger than the growth rate of the Tier 2 nations, and that will split the game forever. And that's probably not a thing that you want to do.
I think every now and then you have to test yourself against better teams and risk those big losses. Otherwise, you can't grow as a team, right? So
just like Los Teros against Los Jaguares last week. I mean, it was a sweep. Jaguares there was only one team in that field after 20-25 minutes, but it gives Los Teros a lot of points to work and a lot of things to really realize where they are standing and against what kind of those teams are they going to play. So it gives you perspective, and it gives you a lot of will to go back and work more.
All right. Thank you very much, Carlos. I really appreciate this. We've gone quite a long time, but it's been a great conversation. I hope to get you on here again someday if I keep doing these. So thanks again. Enjoy the sunshine down in Uruguay. We're stuck up here in the snow in Canada.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for me to keep doing it. We will keep listening.
Carlos Arboleya, former captain of Los Terros, and who knows, maybe he'll get the call for Rugby World Cup 2019. He's really not that old. He looked in pretty good shape in the sevens. So big thanks to him. You can find Carlos on Twitter at CM Arboleya. I'll spell that out, Arboleya. And of course, I hope to get more South American guests in the future, especially with the new professional competition on the way, potentially early next year. Fingers crossed, although it'll be a lot more work. So we'll see. I do have one more guest today. ARN's own Paul Tait is back. He was a little under the weather and still pretty busy down in Brazil, but he was able to join me for just a few minutes to talk about the ARC and this weekend's Super Rugby opener for Los Aguares. All right, Paul, we're through the first 2 weekends of the America's Rugby Championship. Just looking at this past weekend, the first game on Friday night, Uruguay versus Chile. Big improvement from Chile over the first round. Surprised at all by that result?
Yes, I was surprised that Chile completed it as well as they did. I thought they were very combative in the forwards. I could probably nominate Ignacio Silva as their standout performer. He gave Uruguay all kinds of problems. They just weren't their usual selves. Very different performance from them. They also didn't have the same kind of service from scrum half, which was highly notable. I thought the Chileans were able to really pressure them and play some pretty good rugby. Unfortunately, that they don't have the overall standards that another team would have had to probably have really given them a genuine fright in that performance, I thought. But Uruguay can only be happy because they were far from at their best and they were missing players to Europe and to Major League Rugby. So even doing that and still getting a win by 15, which is above the 14 threshold, which is important for world rankings points. So from their perspective, it's probably a pass mark. Hopefully Chile can really build from this and find a way of giving their players the rest which they need and doing better in the next stage of the tournament compared to in the prior years.
So now Uruguay's got to go and they've got to play the Argentina next, after not this coming weekend, but the weekend after, of course, we're coming up to this first ever rest weekend. So they got to play Argentina and then the USA, and then they'll finish up with Brazil. But it looks like they're going to have to do those without some of their most experienced players, Diego Magno, Matteo Sanguinetti, Alejandro Nieto, all these guys heading off to, of course, the Toronto pair as well, heading off to Major League Rugby now. So, this is kind of a chance to test themselves, I guess, with some different players ahead of the World Cup. Are we expecting them to get a result against, I guess, Brazil would be the one that they'd be targeting now?
Yeah, and I think it's basically going to be the Uruguay 15 kind of team we saw last year. That's basically what to expect now. Looks like they're going to be very much just Uruguay-centric this time around. The game against Brazil could be very interesting because, of course, Chile got a win over the Uruguay 15 last year. And Brazil are a team causing massive problems to a lot of countries. That the scrum of theirs is just fantastic. And if they can really build on their performance against Canada, then the goal of fourth place finish, which they set themselves, will realistically be realized, if not higher. So it's going to be really good to see how this unfolds. And this bye weekend should actually benefit Brazil tremendously because this front row that they have, they're not small men. And asking them to play week in, week out in a tournament such as this is extremely demanding. It's similar in many ways to one of the ferocious Samoan scrums from years gone by, when those guys were able to play 2 or 3 matches back to back in World Cups in the old format. Many didn't see what was coming, and this is the same kind of shock which we've seen countries face so far. And so having a bye round for them is just going to be tremendous.
And speaking on that result, Canada versus Brazil, 18-10, the final. Brazil getting the win again. You know, I don't think a lot of people seem strangely surprised by this, but I don't think it's really a surprise to us at all. Certainly, I really thought there was a strong chance of Brazil winning, and certainly the manner, maybe the ease of the victory maybe is a surprise. You know, Reeves kicked 6 penalty goals. He had a couple more shots that he missed. I mean, they really dominated the game. Canada had very little to show for after the first 10 minutes of the game when they scored all of their points. But the other thing is, I think people are underestimating Brazil. Everybody's kind of pigeonholing them and saying, you know, this is a 10-man rugby team. Well, that's how they won, but we've seen them in the past. How they beat the USA in 2016 was running rugby, and the last time they beat Canada, the same thing, running rugby, a try scored at the end. So I think people aren't giving them enough credit right now. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And even if it is 10-man rugby, I mean, I don't see that as being a negative. I mean, one of the feature matches in the last World Cup was Georgia against Tonga. And, I mean, the blueprint that Georgia established in that match is not all that different to Brazil playing against the Canadians. So, I mean, they're doing what they need to do to get the result. And that's exactly what anyone should realistically do. You've got a goal, which is to win, and you've got the means of doing so. You're going to have to establish your own game plan to get that done. I mean, we all know what happens if you don't go down that route. Just look at what's happening to France at the moment, for instance. I mean, France just having all that the depth that they do, but players are just a mess. They don't know what they're supposed to be playing. The players have openly admitted they weren't sure they're supposed to stand on the field, things like that. Brazil, no, it's entirely different. They know what they're doing. It's a game plan which is functioning well. Canadian mistakes, whether they were penalties or knock-ons, were severely punished. And often this came in either to kick a goal or just a territory advantage. And when you're playing a game like that, and at the start, as Brazil were, they were playing catch-up. Once they got ahead, they did play the percentages brilliantly and got the job done. So I don't see the style of play really is factoring in here. It's about winning, and they did that.
Argentina 15, 45-14 winners over the USA. This one is a surprise to me, but just in the manner of the victory. I think we both expected the USA actually to win this. And it was just people are pointing at the red card, but it was 21-0 before the red card even happened. I don't even think that card had much of an effect on the rest of the game. Personally, I thought the USA kind of recovered well from that, all things considered. But I mean, this game was done and dusted already.
Oh, absolutely. And there were members of the Argentine media in contact with me to clarify things pre-match. In the days ahead, though, they were of the view that the United States were favorites to win. And they were basically confirming how many of these Eagles players are going to be playing against Los Pumas in the World Cup. And, I ran through my projected team as we've put on America's Rugby News together. And I said, look, of them, there's going to be 10 of them starting against Argentina 15 this weekend. And so based on that, and based on past results and performances in Argentina selections and so forth, they are very much the team that should be favorites to win. So to see that Argentina 15 victory, it's going to require a very good performance. And there's no way you can go into this match presuming anything else. And so 21-0 up prior to the red card. Yeah, I don't think the red card changed anything. I think anytime a team is down by a score like that, if you're able to reverse it, you're doing a tremendous job. And it just didn't seem like much was going right for the Eagles, unfortunately. They had probably outplayed in I would suggest at least 13 of the 15 starting players. The back three was just appalling defense. Santiago Carreras really exploited them, as did Julian Dominguez. And the weapons which for example, Brazilians had against Argentina 15 were not the same. The scrum was not as good, and Argentina 15's also developed. And they just played smart. I mean, the Eagles really, I don't think they were up to the same standards as we had come to expect. And that's just credit to the Eagles, because They really have been the form team throughout the what is now 4-year history of the tournament.
Two different trajectories now. The USA has pretty much said goodbye to the title with that result. They got Brazil, they've got Uruguay, and they've got Canada last. For them, maybe a chance to run out a couple more players that they haven't looked out ahead of the World Cup. Argentina 15, well, it's about wrapping up the title. And as you said, the Grand Slam, really the only obstacle looking at this, depleted Uruguay probably not going to stand a chance in Buenos Aires. Canada in Langford, I mean, I can't really see that. Is it safe to call this one for Argentina 15 now?
I think so. I would say that Argentina 15 have got their two prospective losses out of the way based on pre-tournament. Anyway, I think the one obstacle in their way will be the Langford match. Probably going to be pretty cold there, of course, though. So, I mean, that's going to favor Argentina 15 in terms of style, perhaps, because as Brazil showed against Canada, they've got some issues in their front row, even though some of those players involved were elite level performers. I mean, some guys involved from professional competitions, and they were still taken to the sword. So Argentina 15 looks to me like they've got this pretty much in the bag. Interesting to see, though, who finishes in which positions, basically. I mean, as it stands, Canada is fifth. They'll be looking to definitely do better, and they're going to have the opportunity to do so. Certainly against Chile, that should be a bonus point win, I would suspect. So that's going to be the next round. And that same weekend, we're going to have United States-Brazil. So if the United States get a win there, then we could see a very different looking table heading into the final two rounds. And that's going to be really interesting to watch. Wondering, though, if Chile can get a competition point or not. They're still on 0. It's hard to really see this. Perhaps their best opportunity would be their away match against Brazil. But, I mean, that's going to be a really big ask, and it's going to be following their trip to Canada. So, I mean, if they have some smart player management there, we might actually see the top side for one of those two games and a rotated side for the other.
For me, I guess the interesting game will be the Uruguay-Brazil game in Montevideo to end the competition. But, looking at it now, 2 weeks done and we're already projecting the winner. Part of the issue of the ARC as it stands is the timing of the tournament, where the teams can't really get their best players out on the field. USA has done pretty well to do that for a couple rounds, but in general, they won't have everybody around for the whole thing. The good news is, from a player acquisition standpoint, is the tournament is set to move. It looks like it's going to be August, September as of next year. Is that good timing, do you think?
Oh, definitely. It'll allow for Major League Rugby and Liga Americana to really be the spotlight while they're being played. And it should also be at a time in which it is far more friendly for the European clubs. Moving it to August would be tremendous for all involved. I think we could therefore conclude pretty much that we would be able to see all the players involved. So if you're looking at the United States, you'd expect to see Blaine Scully, no problems being released, for example, from the Cardiff Blues. And you could probably apply this across virtually all of them.
And yeah, even with the timing, you could see a couple more Super Rugby players even added to the Argentina 15. So the tournament as a whole, I think, will benefit from this move. But speaking of which, Super Rugby firing up this weekend, opening weekend, Aguares versus the Lions. We're just going to see the Aguares lineup. I guess to talk two positions in particular, loose head prop and on the flank for this one.
So Marcos Camas, he's fit, but only recently. So good opportunity for Rodrigo Bruni. Michael Vives is similar in that we had a surprise name in the Argentina 15, which was Santiago Garcia Bota, who was the starting loosehead for Jaguares last year, of course, and for Argentina for a lot of the year. So he's actually been linked alongside Martin Landajo to Harlequins in the English Premiership. So this might be the real reason for his non-involvement for Jaguares and being, let's say, demoted to the Argentina 15. But Vives, having said that, is really a tremendous player and has the potential. Unfortunately, Argentina's had probably 4 years of just zero development in terms of loose head props. Anyway, tight head props, there've been potentially some, but just going from the old, we had Marcos Ayerza, and from that, nobody to fill that void, literally. Jaguares have got some pretty handy tight heads. We just need to fix the scrum. and they are actually, doing their best in that regards, because we've seen the bringing in of scrum coach from France. We've seen officially the UAR have opened a new position which is responsible for the scrum. So nationally, they're admitting that the scrum's an absolute crisis. They're trying to repair that permanently. I think Medrano and Vives are both very young and talented props, and them starting Super Rugby is tremendous. And they're going to be surrounded by many well-established players. So looking forward to seeing how they perform.
So looking at the season as a whole, what do you think? Are the Jaguares going to make the playoffs this year?
We're going to see lots of weakened sides here and there, probably specifically for touring. And that's going to be true for Jaguares as much as it is for anybody else. So I do expect to see many players getting opportunity. I also expect to see a range of results. But I think Argentina's side will have the goods to be able to repeat last year's performance. Realistically, the only player that they've lost is, there have been more, but it's Nicolas Sanchez is the one everyone talks about. But they have players on the roster that have been around for a long time, but have been held back for basically the reasons of the established top one or two players per position have held them down. It's not going to be like that so much this year. And the Rugby World Cup will take priority, and Ledesma has said that, so has Quesada.
And before I let you go, speaking of the World Cup, Mr. Ledesma off to France this weekend to speak to some potential Pumas. Who's he going to talk to there?
Well, it's going to be Ramiro Herrera, Juanino Faconduis, and Nicolas Sanchez. And naturally, people are happy about that, but they're also like, hang on, what about the others? Because there are others, of course. We've seen others playing under Ledesma. And there are others who have been extremely impressive performances who deserve their opportunity as well. So, Benjamin Urpicheta, for example. People have asked, hold on, why? Surely he's going to be involved in this too. Or people asking, why not UK as well? Is he going to go over there too? Presumably, yes. I don't see why all players will not be considered. I think they will be. But those four names he did mention are projected to be definitely involved in the 23 for the World Cup pool matches. And of them, got Issa, who hasn't played it for Argentina since he moved to France, and Imhoff, who hasn't even played since the last World Cup. And those two, for most people, including myself, will be starting in the World Cup. So getting them involved is tremendous, but we've got to add Garlasa, for example. He played last year, so surely he's going to be involved. Cordero in England is the full winger of all wingers in the Premiership. So we've got more guys that they will surely have their opportunities.
Exciting times indeed. Nice to see them finally back in the equation, particularly Imhoff and Issa, as you say. Well, we've had a big year already, and we're just a few weeks in, and still a big year ahead. So I'll let you go. Enjoy the weekend and the opening of Super Rugby.
Absolutely. It should be good, and it's going to be great to play in Buenos Aires to open the tournament at last.
That was Paul Tait, of course, of America's Rugby News. You can find him on Twitter at Argentina_2027. And Paul always has the latest South American news and rumors on that account. So if you aren't already, I would advise giving him a follow. That's it for me. I'm Brian Ray. You can find me on Twitter at Ray's Rugby. I hope you found all that conversation as informative as I did. No ARC this weekend, but Super Rugby is back, and there are 4 Major League Rugby games to watch, so it's really not much of a weekend off. Back with you soon. From all of us at ARN, enjoy your rugby weekend.